Lo siento por mi español es muy malo. So I'm grateful that you're willing to listen to me in English. I also warned your professor that I'm a New Yorker, so we talk very fast. So Christian has permission to yell at me if I start talking too fast. We're obviously in very different times. And so I want to talk about a few things that I believe, but then put it in the context of this emergency. And I hope you are all healthy, and I hope your families are healthy. And I'm sorry that that America is going to show the way in how to do this wrong, but there we are. Just a moment of historical context to see where we are here. I'd like to talk about, and I'm doing a lot of research now on the history of the book and printing, and because I think we're moving out of Gutenberg's age. But let's talk about Gutenberg's age for just 1 minute. Year 1450 is when movable type roughly was perfected by Gutenberg. It had previously been in China and in Korea, but he managed to make it work as a business. So 1450 is where we begin. It took 150 years till 1605 before anyone thought to invent the newspaper, a full century and a half. It wasn't until about 1800 that the first major technological improvements were made in the press. 1814, steam-powered presses came in, and we started to see speed in the mass. 1840s, we get the telegraph. 1900, we get broadcast. 1950, television. And here we are at 2020. Well, what did I leave out? Of course, the internet. But the internet, the web, the commercial web, was started going out only 25 years ago now. And that's to say that if you look at 25 years from movable type, we're at 1475 in a very long progression. What I'm trying to say here is that we have a very long time to rethink what this is. We're still looking at the internet as if it's a medium, and I think it's something entirely new and entirely different. And the internet is not part of media. Media are part of the internet. And as a result, it's up to you to completely rethink what we do as journalists. And that's the opportunity. That's why I'm so excited to be able to talk to you, because you are the entrepreneurs who will reinvent journalism in new forms. So that's a little bit of context here. Now, at the same time, we are in a dire existential emergency. I think that in the United States, we saw publications were already in bad shape. In Spain, we know that publications are in bad shape. And now their advertising has disappeared. A lot of the circulation revenue is going to disappear. So there's an obligation upon you to reinvent. I think a lot of attention was going to how do we change existing media organizations and make them survive. I'm afraid that many of them will die. And we have to look at how we rebuild from the ashes. That's your job. And that's why it's so important for you to think about new ways to do journalism. I wrote a post about a year ago that I called my Scorched Earth post, in which I looked at, and I asked the industry to look in very blunt terms at how bad it is in every revenue stream we have, how bad advertising is, how bad circulation is, and so on. And then we brought in 30 top executives to talk about that. And I thought we might have a little bit of time before we had to rebuild from the ashes. But I can see right now that we are in an emergency. So I heard about just a few of your businesses. I would love to hear about them all. And I think that what you should take out of this class and this time is that you learn the skill of starting something new, and then you bring that in new ways. And what I would argue is that the most important thing to learn is how to listen. how to understand a community or a market and observe them and listen to them and empathize with them and reflect their needs, and then decide how you bring journalism to them and how you can survive doing that. I think that, so we teach in my school at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism in New York, where you all should consider coming after you finish your degree, once we can travel again. We started a degree in entrepreneurial journalism, but we also started one in social journalism. And social journalism doesn't start with content. It doesn't start with the story idea. It starts with the community. And whether you're doing social journalism or whether you're starting a business, that skill of listening to what the customer wants. Don't go out to the customer and say, I have an idea. What do you think? No. You ask, how do you live? How do you get information now? What are your needs? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? Let them inspire you. And then you turn around and try to make things quickly to get them out into the market so they can tell you what works and doesn't work. And you're constantly listening. Frankly, we in journalism are bad at listening. We tend to go out there and we already have the story idea. Then we go out and with our notebook and we get quotes for our story. That's not listening. Listening is being surprised. Listening is learning things you didn't know about a community. Now, I believe that one impact of the internet is to kill the idea of mass media. Mass media was a requirement of the technology we had before, the printing press and the broadcast tower. Mass media said you have to treat everyone all the same. Mass media said that you had to gather a huge audience for the same product. The internet is all about communities. The internet is about being able to speak and find people who share your interests and needs and joining with them in action. So how do we in journalism help that? I changed my definition of journalism recently because I have tenure at my university. I can do things like that. My definition of journalism now is to convene communities into respectful, informed, and productive conversation. Say that again. To bring together communities into respectful and decent, informed and smart, productive and useful conversation. There's a brilliant professor, late professor at Columbia University named James Carey, who talks about how society is conversation. Journalism is conversation. So I would think about the things you do that are built around conversation, that are built around community, come back to that in a second, and built around service. Not about manufacturing a product called content, but about serving a community that is already conversing with itself, trying to do what it wants to do. Now, when I say community, I don't just mean a town. I mean any definition people have that brings them together. I don't mean an external definition like millennials. That's bullshit. I mean people with diabetes or people with coronavirus or parents or grandparents or LGBTQ or other definitions that people have of themselves. And go find those communities or markets. Listen to them in their conversation. And you can now. You can listen to them on Facebook and Twitter. You can engage with them in conversation in all kinds of new ways, even while you're stuck in your apartment. You can go and find a community and engage with that community and understand their needs. So we have a few different programs at my school, which I mentioned. One is social journalism, which I'm very proud of, which is about service, journalism as service. We also, by the way, have a bilingual, the nation's only bilingual master's degree in journalism. So consider coming to CUNY, to Newmark, after you finish your degree. We have a new program for news innovation and leadership. These are high-level people in news organizations around the world managing editors, vice presidents at major publications like the New York Times and Der Spiegel and the Financial Times. I'm going to teach a class online now. It wasn't going to be online for them next month. And what I want to ask them to do is an exercise I mentioned to you. Then I'll stop talking and we can converse. I want them to sit down together at the whiteboard, and I want to come up with a list of communities. What are the ways that people tie themselves together? How do they think of themselves as a community? What needs do they have? Come up with a really creative long list of communities, which you can also consider markets. Then come up with new forms of journalism and new technologies journalism hasn't used. Not just to make content, not to make stories, but things like this, education. When we get back together, events, all kinds of new forms and technologies. Then consider all the possible revenue streams you can get, which I'll get back to in 1 second. And then add on the mission of journalism. What are we here to do for communities and people to help improve their lives? And out of that long list, be inspired to reinvent journalism in ways we've never thought of. I'm too old. I know too much about journalism as we used to make it in print, in broadcast. You don't come with those assumptions. You have some from us, you should learn them from us, but then you should question them. Question every assumption. And then finally, how are we going to survive doing this now? I wish I had an easy answer for you. I wish I could tell you that if you just do this and this and this, you will all make money and all be happy. I don't have that answer. I'm sorry. You're going to have to come up with that answer. But there are many new ways to consider how to make money to support journalism. The two things we have depended upon in the past, obviously, were just advertising and subscription revenue of content for money. But there's all kinds of other options like membership now. Membership where I don't just give you something for something in return. I belong to something. I want to support something. I care about something. I have a passion about something. If you rethink membership in that way, new ways to reward that, new things to give in return. Maybe I want content. Maybe I want access to a community of friends and people who share my interests. Maybe I want education and I want to learn something. Maybe I want bargains at the store. I'm a parent and I want to get cheap diapers. Maybe I want to have events. I don't know. But you can get money from me for a lot of different purposes and ways. Or maybe I just want to support the work of journalism. If you look at The Guardian, they started a new membership program about a year and a half ago, and now more than 1 million people have given them money because they want to support the journalism. It's rather like El Diario in Spain, where they want something to be public. They want the country to benefit from this, and there are enough people who will support it to benefit. Now, I want to be careful that we don't think that charity will support us. We have to deliver real value to people in markets. But I think that there are opportunities to get support of people because they care. And so as you look at that big piece of paper with all those communities and all those forms and all those revenue streams and that reason you exist, and you look out in the world right now at what might die in media, and I don't want it to die, and you don't want it to die, because those are places you get jobs, and we need that. But the world is going to need you to create the new journalism that is going to solve communities' needs. So don't just start with something fun or neat that you could do. Start with the community's needs. Listen to a community, understand what their needs are. We're talking about this in New York right now. My wife teaches English as a second language to poor Spanish-speaking immigrants in the US, some of whom are documented immigrants, some of whom are probably not. Well, in this crisis right now, they have emergency information needs. And she came up with a list of that yesterday. That includes what's their protection against getting evicted from their homes. It includes what their rights are to health care. How do we come up with systems to get this information to people who otherwise wouldn't get it? That is the future of journalism. Now, will I tell you right away you'll make a fortune doing it? No. But you're here to do journalism. You're here to do God's work. And somehow, I hope God will provide. So that's what I wanted to say to you. I think it's within the time that I had. I'm eager to, I see there's a list of questions, which is a great list. Also eager to have conversation. So back over to you, Christian.
Thank you so much. It's been so interesting. I think it's the idea we are trying to give them since the beginning of the course. We are trying to say the importance about creating a real value proposition. In this sense, I would like to ask you, because you were talking about listening to communities, if you really think that small and medium media companies care enough about their value propositions. Because we know New York Times, Washington Post have great teams to do so, but how can we do it?
I certainly think it's possible. I think El Diario is an example of some place that realizes it has a value to the larger community and recognizes that value in multiple ways. But I also see in the United States, I see smaller newspapers that think that they have a God-given right to a paywall and money from consumers that aren't very good and that aren't thinking about that value and that probably will fail as a result.
Yeah.
So it is certainly possible, by all means possible, for smaller publications. Right now, we see local publications doing important work. In the US, we have a community of practice with Spanish language publications where they deeply care about their communities and are trying to figure out how to serve them. So yes, it is by all means possible for a small publication to have that sense of value, but it is also possible for them to think that they're entitled to do business the ways they used to do, and that's not going to work anymore.
Okay, how would you define the ideal journalist for these times or the future of the craft?
I like that question because I think my answer changes. I talked to somebody the other day who said, when you got into journalism, what did you envision you were going to do? And I envisioned that I was going to be a writer. Well, that's not journalism now. The ideal journalist now, I think, is a listener. I keep pounding on that idea that we need to listen well. And then we are very, second, we're creative in the solutions we bring. In our social journalism program that ended last year, the last class, the ideas were very creative. Some students one student from Brazil created the Theater of the Oppressed for people who've gone through sexual abuse to be able to work that out. One student is working on databases for key information for opioid addicts. One student came up with a support network for the families of opioid addict deaths. This isn't about writing stories. This is about creative ways to solve people's problems. So that's number one is listen. Number two is be creative. Number three is build value, recognize that value you bring to people's lives and measure yourself that way. And number four, of course, is be honest. We tell difficult truths and we have to have the trust to do that.
Thank you so much. My colleague Chema is going to do the next question.
Hi, it's Chema. You've talked about the importance of the creativity as a feature for journalists. And in this sense, we also want to know, what do you think about influencers, which we think are quite creative in this sense, and if we are doomed to work alongside them. And what do you think about the relationship in the future about journalists and influencers?
I like the attitude of that question. Are we doomed to work beside them? There's a few different answers. If we think about a paid influencer who has no trust, that's a problem. But that's not much different from public relations people or advertisers. We've been there before. And we've learned how to create a wall that says, this is independent information you can trust. This is paid for. And so we have to be clear about that wall forever. And we cannot be paid for. We must be independent. But I want to be a little bit careful because some people we consider influencers are just citizens who talk. And citizens can now reach a public with a message that has influence. Many, many years ago, before Twitter, before Facebook, I had problems with a Dell computer. And I went on my blog. I wasn't very mature. I said, this is a piece of shit. And I wasn't an influencer about computers or technology. But a lot of other people thought their Dell computers were pieces of shit. And so suddenly there was a rush of conversation that had an influence on Dell, surprisingly, which improved immensely. So I wasn't an influencer on purpose. I was an accidental influencer, and I wasn't the influencer. My message was. So I think we have to be careful that we still want to be very good at listening to the public and not thinking that we are somehow above or separate from them, while still being careful that we understand what people's motives are and influences are.
And talking about honesty and the ethics side of journalism, we've seen in the last days that we have had this fake news problem. Well, we have this problem, but we have had it with coronavirus thing, and we all are suffering from this. How do you think media are acting with this in the United States?
Good and bad. I think that, so I wrote a piece on Medium and on my blog at Buzz Machine this week about the need for expertise. I think that in the political atmosphere, disinformation from bad actors was a major problem. I agree. But right now, as somebody I admire said, the disinformation is coming more often from ignorance than from malice. That's someone who just doesn't know better. Well, that's where journalism's needed. So I went on Twitter and I created a Twitter COVID list. If you go to my Twitter account, Jeff Jarvis, look under the three dots in my lists, and you'll see a COVID list there. It has 550 epidemiologists, virologists, doctors, researchers, NGOs, and a few journalists in there. They are experts. In fact, Twitter came to me to get help getting them verified with the little blue check marks so that you could know that's a real doctor from a real hospital who really does research on pandemics. I have been buried in this list for the last few weeks, and it's the one thing that gives me hope: science. And I think that media have to do a better job of amplifying the experts. Instead, we have a lot of people who are armchair, amateur people who have opinions that aren't informed. So the New York Times this week had a column by a guy who, yes, he's a doctor, but every single one of my experts said that he was an idiot and was saying the wrong things. And he was saying things that got into the ear of Donald Trump and out of the mouth of Donald Trump. And that's the most dangerous thing you can have today. And the guy who wrote this column tends to be a paid advocate for the sugar industry and food industries. He doesn't know anything about pandemics. Why did the New York Times give their space and their voice to that idiot rather than to one of my 550 true experts. And some of those experts have been screaming about the New York Times this week as a result. So we need to do a better job. You know, I'm fond of saying we journalists are never experts. We find the experts. So I think our primary job right now is to amplify the voice of expertise.
Thank you.
Professor Jarvis, sorry.
Yeah, go.
People say, Professor Jarvis, that after this pandemic, the world will never be the same in different areas such as economy or certain professions. How do you think journalism will change if it changes?
I wish I knew. I don't know. In fact, so I'm known as the guy who's kind of radical and crazy. And I've been saying recently that I'm not radical enough. I'm not crazy enough. I have to think more radically, more audaciously. Well, right now in this crisis, I'm at a loss for words because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how the economy is going to come back. The advertising that I thought would still shrink but stay around for some years to help support journalism, right now it disappeared like that. I don't know. Will people who've lost their jobs pay for subscriptions? Probably not. Will charities give money to journalism or to medicine? Probably medicine. So I think what we have to do, and this is why you all are ideally positioned for this, is you have to think small. Don't think huge. Don't think that you're going to solve all the world's problems and build the next Google of Spain. If you do, great. I congratulate you. Give a lot of money to the school. But think about a single community and single needs and how to serve that community. Think about new tools and ways to do it. Think about new revenue. How efficient can you be? How little money can you use to do the journalism that you can survive doing it? We're going to change some of our program into looking at the independent journalist and how he or she supports themselves. So I don't know what this world is going to look like. My hope is that folks like you will be very creative and come up with new ideas that I'm too old to think of.
May I for a moment? You allow me? Yeah. Chet, I mean, you're hoping the next generation again, that was what you said now. So coming from the ashes, bringing the future. Is it already the time? I've seen it in many countries, media cultures are different. In Austria, for example, or Germany, very slow developing, still very stable media markets, media companies with a lot of money still. But now maybe the moment, sad as it might be, we've seen it with Corona now, the first 1 or 2, 3 weeks with all the sorrows we have, the expectations we have, as you said now. Is this the moment when the next generation with new ideas will come into the system with this complete change? Because for quite some time we had the impression it's been the big companies were not didn't do innovation, but they were strong enough to keep it under control, to have no competition in some of the countries. Is this the moment for the next generation?
I hope so. I pray so. I think so. I spoke to a major, I won't say which one, a major German publishing company some months ago. And I was shocked at how tiny their digital revenue was compared to their print revenue, which tells me they're not ready for the future. Because I'm not against print. Print is nice. I have books all around me. I love print. But print is not going to be our primary means. So they have lots of money. Yes, now they can command very high subscription rates now. Yes, they still have advertisers. Yes. But even so, they might be in danger now because the revenue for advertising is going to go down. The revenue for subscription is going to go down. Their costs have stayed the same. So I think some companies will die. Now, people have been predicting the death of newspapers for a long time, and all in all, they haven't died. You take, I have friends who are on El País, and it's gone through rough times, but it's come through with new leadership and it's doing good work. But the business is hard. They will all tell you that the business is very hard. And I think some can go away. So yes, there's an opportunity and a need for the next generation, but my only advice is don't try to build what was, build what can be, build something new, and you'll fail part of the time. You're guaranteed to fail sometimes. That's what innovation means. It means risk, but try. Start small, don't risk too much, learn from that. If it succeeds, great. If it fails, learn the lessons and go to the next thing, which is a very American attitude. I know we kind of fetishize failure.
But you've been very successful with your entrepreneurial program in that sense. Many of your students, of your alumni, do interesting projects and started earlier to do so. So what would be your advice for, in a more European sense, Spain, The Guardian in Britain and its situation in Central Europe, what would be your advice, what UNIS should do or other academies should do to support that kind of startup journalism, that new journalism, the new thinking, not based on the roots of, as you say, what we've learned 50 years ago or 40 years ago? What to do?
We're changing. We're going to change our entrepreneurial program. We're not offering it the way it was, and we're rethinking it now. Because it used to be set up to go start a company. And I still believe that's an opportunity, but that's hard. I think it's also important, we believe this, for the individual journalist to be self-supporting. Right now, an individual journalist can go out there and serve a community really well and make money on Medium and YouTube and Substack and Patreon and Kickstarter and book contracts and consulting contracts and events when we can get back together. And it's hard work, but an individual journalist can find a way, I hope, to serve a community. So our hope is to empower every young journalist with those skills. Now, if they also go and start a business, great, those are additional skills. But a lot of journalists, we find, are not necessarily getting full-time jobs. They've been freelancers, but then they've started something else. So one of my students started a thing called, after Trump was elected, he started something called What the Fuck Just Happened Today. And it is a daily email newsletter about Trump and what the fuck just happened today. And he asked for money on, I think, Patreon, and he makes more than $100,000 a year from that. Now, that won't go on forever because, God willing, we will get rid of Trump. Pray for us. And so that business might go away, but for 4 years, he's made a living out of summarizing and bringing context to the craziness that has been America. That's one good example about how an individual journalist made a living in an entrepreneurial way at low risk and small scale.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, because most of them probably will end up being a typical workers as freelance journalists or part-time employees. What advice would you give to them in order to achieve a successful career?
So our students get hired at the Newmark School at a very high rate. And I think the reason for that is that they are not afraid. They are willing to try new things all the time. They are curious, and they teach themselves new skills and new tools. At our school, we teach every student every medium. So they all learn how to do text, of course, but also video, photo, audio, data, web, and so on. And so we did some research recently on the job market. What we found is that employers still expect students to do the obvious things, know what a story is, be able to report reliably, be able to write clearly. True. But then they needed one or two superpowers, we called it, that in addition to that, you're really good at data journalism, or you make super web videos, or you really understand social. Develop one or two of those skills so you can go to a newsroom and say, I am killer at social media. Let me show you what I've done. And probably the newsroom doesn't have a superstar in social media, or needs people to make great web videos, or doesn't have enough expertise and is scared of data journalism. So my advice would be learn all the skills you need to learn, the baseline, but then develop one or two where you are killer.
So now I'm gonna sum up with a last question from the teachers, and then if you agree with it, we're gonna open the possibility for our students to ask something more specific about the projects and all that through the chat. Okay. Okay. So if you had to choose 3 keys or tips about launching a project like they're doing now in this moment, what could they be?
Number one, you're going to be sick of me saying this, but listen. And the most successful students we've had did a really good job of listening to as many of potential customers as possible. Bring me evidence of their needs. Show me what they've said. Show me what they do that convinces you of this need. That's one. Two, be fast and quick and get something out to those users so you can learn from them whether they like it or not, whether it works for them or not. Three, stay small. Don't have grand plans to hire 10 people. Good luck with that. If you're alone and you need that first euro to feed yourself, how do you get it? Think small.
So now we're waiting to see if they ask something, and in this time, I also wanted to consult with you if you've seen the last strategy from El Diario with this coronavirus crisis. They have asked for 20 more euros per month to their members, but they keep opening the rest of the contents for all the people. So I want you to like evaluate if this you think this is a good response to this type of crisis.
I think it could be, because I think that I know that El Diario and The Guardian both share this idea of making journalism open for the country. And we don't need everyone to pay, but we need people to pay to support it. And the work of the journalism is more important now than ever. I think people are worried about they're losing their jobs. Their savings have collapsed. Again, Donald Trump's fault. So they're not likely to spend a lot of money in those kinds of ways. But if you get enough people, I think that's smart.
May I ask a last one, reacting to what you said before, the great project you mentioned about Corona experts on your Twitter list, the 550 experts, which is a great idea. So do you see recently, well, we are connecting many journalist correspondents from different countries in Europe recently, telling us what's going on with the topic. But in the US, do you recently see more projects like this, or is it still, again, for the idea of a few like you, or is there much going on, especially with the Corona crisis, organizing communities, doctors, experts, communities in whatever region? Do you see many of them?
Not enough. I just put in the chat a link to my Twitter list and also a piece I wrote. No, I don't think there's been enough yet. The problem is that the journalists, unless you're a really good science journalist, and there's one I think is great, you'll probably know. Hold on. Kai Kupferschmidt. He writes for Science Magazine, auf English, in Inglés. But he's a very good science journalist who understands how to do this. And I've been following him on Twitter and learning a lot. The problem with science journalists, the problem with science coverage, is that we in journalism, we headline writers, tend to think that the latest word is the last word. And so we don't understand the process of science. We don't understand how it's additive and debating and testing and figuring out. So we always want the story, the final story. Well, that leads to very dangerous kinds of coverage, and it leads, especially in this age, to danger like Donald Trump grabbing onto something. And I, as I admit in the piece I just sent, I retweeted, without any comment, a tiny French study about these two drugs for coronavirus. And it was a tiny study, that's all it was, and I knew that, but I didn't add, hey, folks, be careful, this is tiny, it's just a thought. Well, Donald Trump has stood up to the microphone every day thinking he's cured coronavirus now because of that one small study, and that's not how science works. So I'm trying to figure out how we get more science journalists to help all journalists understand how to do this, so even places like the New York Times stop fucking up. And I see preguntas, but you're going to have to translate.
Yeah, they're working on them. Meanwhile, I would like to know how media sports rights are going to develop in the next months, because it's a huge business. And for example, great projects like The Athletic depend on competitions and ESPN, many companies. How is sports journalism deal with this situation?
I have no idea. I think it's going to be very, very hard. ESPN is already been having problems. It used to be the only place to watch sports and see about sports. And then things like The Athletic came along that took away audience and writers. And now, of course, as in Spain, around the world, there's no sports. It will come back, but if a publication has had problems, those problems are now amplified. So I don't know. Sports requires the athletes and the audience for the athletes. Entertainment is going to be a problem too, because shows are shutting down right now. Movies, not as many movies are going to be made. But the things that we have, we can all watch at home on our internet or on our phones. So entertainment coverage will probably be okay, but sports coverage is just going to have to sit and wait and find a way to do that. It could be a year and a half.
Yeah.
Until we have a vaccine, it could be a year and a half with no sports, which is weird.
Yeah, and if you were one of our students, what would you study? I mean, concrete skills like, I don't know, artificial intelligence, that data journalism.
I think understanding data is going to be key in any way. It doesn't mean you have to be an algorithm writer, but you can understand how to read data. The Financial Times has a brilliant person who's been doing the charts of the growth of the disease. He understands the essence behind data. He's talking to doctors. They're agreeing with how he does it. So that's going to be a huge skill. I think social and understanding how to listen to people, I keep saying that, is going to be an important skill. Obviously multimedia, obviously understanding how to make video and audio, podcasts or YouTube is important. And then I would say, believe it or not, I would still argue for other academic pursuits. And I didn't do this myself, and I regret it. I think that journalism has a lot in common with anthropology. Anthropology, the study of communities.
Yeah.
I think that learning about neuroscience and how the brain operates is important to rethinking how journalism operates. Design is an important field to understand how to present things well. So the other disciplines at a university are going to be useful to journalism.
Thanks. In the chat, I know asks, which are the job roles that big communication corporations are going to demand in the next years?
I keep on saying the same thing over and over again. I think that understanding how to listen to the public, understand their needs, whether that's journalism or marketing, that's going to be critical. I think presentation skills, that used to just be writing, it used to be page design, but there's a brilliant person who does at the Washington Post who does a great TikTok account. TikTok's not going to become the future of all journalism, but he saw how to use a tool in a new way. So that kind of spirit and attitude of being able to take on a new tool, where the audience is going, and figuring out how to serve them there.
And Susanna asks, where do we have to put the line between objectivity in journalism or getting personally involved in some issues?
So when I came through journalism school, Susanna, we were told you are objective and you are like almost not human. You don't have a heart and a soul. You operate this way. I have changed my mind about this. I think that journalists have always been advocates. We've always advocated for justice and the little guy against the big, powerful forces. What we need to be is transparent about where we come from, what our perspective is, what our biases are. But right now, I was just talking to someone at my school, and I think that one project that I would like to start is something. We used to have something in American newspapers and television we called the action line. And somebody would send in a letter saying, I went to this store and they gave me a refrigerator and it doesn't work and I can't get my money back and they ignore me. Help. And so the newspaper would use its power to call the store and said, I'm calling for Mrs. Lopez and she can't get her refrigerator. Are you going to fix this? And the store would say, oh, of course. And Mrs. Lopez would go off with a new refrigerator. Well, this is a way we were advocates for people. And I think that in this time, we at a one-to-one level, we need to consider being advocates for people. And we need to be advocates for communities and their needs. In the United States, big old mass media was run by people who looked like me, old white men. And there were many, many communities that were never involved in, listened to, served by, represented by big media. If you were African American in this country, if you were Latino in this country, if you were LGBTQ in this country, you didn't see yourself in big media. And so now we're learning with social media that we can see things like Living While Black and Black Lives Matter and Me Too movement, where people have their own voices. And I celebrate that. And so part of what we have to do is say, how do we help them who already have a voice? We don't give them the voice, they have it. But how do we inform their conversations? How do we give them the information they need? How do we introduce people to each other? That changes this idea that journalism is somehow separate from the world. I think journalism is in the world, but we have to be intellectually honest. We have to be transparent about our own biases. We have to correct ourselves when we're wrong. Those remain forever.
Ines wants to ask, what's the main difference for you between Spanish and American journalism? I add this, we usually look at American journalism as a unicorn, as the best example of what we have to do. How do you see the situation? What's the difference, if there is a difference?
I don't know it well enough. I think there's a few differences. One is that in Spain, you've always had a robust national competition. The United States is too big. So we didn't have national newspapers until the 1970s when technology allowed that. We had local monopolies, which led to this myth of objectivity, that one paper had to serve everybody. So as a result, I think that it's a healthier market ideologically in Spain to say I can read ABC and I can read El País and I can read El Diario, and I can get different perspectives on what goes on. We haven't had that in the United States much. That's one difference. The other difference, I'm told, tell me if I'm wrong, is that the whole writing style tends to vary more. That we in American journalism are more short and direct and punchy, and in Spanish, you're better writers. You're more storytellers than we are. And I also think the third thing I would say is that I know that going way back in the early days of the web and news, kind of the glory days of El País, it led the world in some of its graphic design treatments. And a lot of American newspapers learned from Spanish journalism.
And Armando asks, you as a defender of open internet, if you think it's possible, how do you think it's possible to combine open internet and also data protection in order to prevent from great companies and other type of political actors to gather this data and use it with manipulation purposes?
So privacy is important. Data protection is important. I salute that flag. But I also think that sharing is important. And I'm about to write a piece about the limits of privacy. There's no more privacy conscious country in Europe than Germany. And Datenschutz, the word for privacy is data protection. It's kind of odd. Even so, right now, Germany is planning to do 100,000 to 200,000 COVID tests a day, and is hiring 500, they call them containment scouts, so that if I have the coronavirus, to tell this person where all I was, who all I saw, so that person can go warn everyone. If you saw Jeff Jarvis, you might have the disease. You need to watch out. Well, you could say that's a violation of privacy. I don't think so. I think that's an important level of sharing. In my own school, someone came down with the disease, we think. They haven't had the test yet. But no one will tell us their name because of privacy. As a result, I don't know whether I was exposed to this person. If I start getting sick and I go in to ask a test, and they ask why, I said, well, I was exposed to somebody. They're going to ask for that name, and I won't have that name. There are limits to privacy. So my view of this is that what we have to concentrate on here is protecting rights at a level of principles. That we should pass laws that say that the sick have human rights. You cannot take away insurance in the US, which we depend upon, if you're sick. You cannot lose your job if you're sick. You cannot lose your home if you're sick. Then the fact that the information about my sickness, it's less important to have to protect it. So I think we got to look at privacy as a principle to protect, but also we've got to share the principle we got to protect the principle of sharing and of knowledge and of information. And we as journalists do that. As to companies taking advantage of our data, that's also a matter for laws. And one thing that's happened is we have a privacy law in the US called HIPAA, which is the reason that I can't find out who in my office might have coronavirus. Well, that was a foolish overreaction, I think, on privacy, and we have to limit this and figure this out. We are in an age of open information. I celebrate that. I wrote a book called Public Parts about this. So I'm a little weird, and Europeans don't tend to like what I have to say about this. But I think that we need to have an ethic of sharing alongside an ethic of privacy.
Thanks. Looking at the future, we can imagine your answer, but Ana Maria wants to know what's more important, skills on technology or looking for a market niche that is original and unique?
Ana Maria, I would say the market niche, the community. You might find very old-fashioned ways to serve a community. One of our students in entrepreneurial journalism last year had an idea for using add billboards on streets to put journalism in for a poor community so they could learn news that way. Well, we've had paper posted onto buildings since the 1500s and before. That's a very old technology. The technology didn't matter. It starts with the need in the community. Indeed, I have students often who say, well, I know how to make audio, so I want to do a podcast. I say, don't start with the technology, start with the need, and then the form of what you do will come out of that.
Okay, thank you. We're going now for the last question because we already have an hour of seminar, which is quite good. We have combined two questions, the question from Julia and question from Raul. They want to know how to make our work more visible out of this cloud of misinformation and fake news, and also contents from other actors such as platforms and video on demand, and all this type of information that come from everywhere.
It's hard. The question really is about trust. Why should someone trust you? I think that comes from a lot of things. It shows that you've studied, that you've listened to the expertise, that you, and very importantly, that you correct mistakes that you make, and you will make mistakes. Credibility comes from correction. And I think it's important to not always concentrate on the disinformation, concentrate on the good information. I think we got distracted these last 3 years, in great measure because of Donald Trump and Fox News in the US, thinking that our entire job was to stop disinformation. No, our job has always been, to spread good information. And if you get a reputation for doing that, and if you do that well, then I think people will come to trust you. They may say they don't trust media, but they'll trust you. And that means that you've got to be responsive to their needs. You've got to listen to their needs. You've got to give them context. You've got to make sure you explain well. If they get confused, consider that your fault and help them learn. And if you make mistakes, correct them.
Thank you.
Well, before we say goodbye, I would like to thank Professor Jarvis for being with us without asking nothing in exchange. You've been so generous, and it's been so valuable for us and for the students. Thank you so much.
Christian, thank you so much. When I put out a thing on Twitter saying, I'm not going anywhere, I'll talk to somebody's class, you were the person who came in, and I'm honored that you asked. And once again, I hope you all stay home and stay healthy.
We will do.
Thank you, Jeff.
Take care of yourself. Goodbye.
Bye. Greetings to the colleagues at CUNY.
Bueno, a todos muchas gracias por acudir y bueno, gracias a Andy Kaltenbrunner, que para quien no estaba, pero creo que estábamos casi todos, nos ha ayudado con unas preguntas muy interesantes. Él es profesor honorífico de la universidad y un auténtico experto en medios, que os recomendamos que sigáis a través de Twitter y de todo lo que ha hecho para el máster y para la universidad. Gracias a todos y nada, pasad buen fin de.
Gracias, Cristian, para organizar esto. No tan fácil no es, entonces muy bien. Tener chef para 1 hora, no todos lo tienen ni en Austria ni en Alemania. En vuestro programa sí, qué bien, ¿no?
Muchísimas gracias, Andy.
Muchas gracias, Andy.
Venga, chao a todos.
Cuidado mucho todos.
Hasta luego.
Chao.